we still don't know how they did it. Not the pyramid itself, though that is extraordinary enough. Not the scale of it. Not the weight of it. The precision. 4 sides, aligned to true north, within a fraction of a degree, without GPS, without satellites, without any instrument we can fully account for. Built by people 4,500 years ago who didn't have the wheel yet. And that is just the pyramid. That's just the part everyone talks about. Tonight, we're going to talk about everything else. Hey, sleepless soul. Before we get into it, go ahead and like the video. Hit subscribe if this is the kind of thing you enjoy. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always strange and wonderful to see who's up at this hour. Now, find a comfortable position, a really comfortable one, because where you're going tonight, comfortable looked very different. Wooden headrests instead of pillows, linen in 40-degree heat, sleeping on rooftops because the houses were too hot. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive it. Here's what nobody tells you about ancient Egypt. It wasn't all pharaohs. It wasn't all gold and gods and dramatic curses. Most of it was people, standing in Nile mud, planting things. Scribes, bent over papyrus, copying the same administrative records for the 47th time. Bakers, making the bread that was literally the currency. Workers, building things so large we still can't entirely explain how. But here is what I keep coming back to about ancient Egypt. The thing that stops me every time. This civilization lasted 3,000 years. 3,000 years. For context, the distance in time between Cleopatra and us is shorter than the distance between Cleopatra and the builders of the pyramids. Cleopatra was closer to the moon landing than she was to the construction of the Great Pyramid. And throughout all of it, the Nile flooded every year. The farmers planted every year. The scribes recorded every year. The priests prayed every year. The bread was baked every single day for 3,000 years. Repetitive, slow, rhythmic, like the river itself, which makes it almost perfectly designed for falling asleep to. So, settle in. Pull whatever you've got a little closer. We're going to spend the next few hours drifting through ancient Egypt together. 3,000 years is a number that means nothing until you do this. Ancient Egypt existed for so long that if you placed its entire history on a single clock, the pyramids were built in the first 10 minutes. Everything else, the pharaohs, the battles, the gods, Cleopatra, all of it happened in the remaining 50. 10 minutes for the pyramids. 50 minutes for everything else. And the whole time, from the first minute to the last, the Nile was doing exactly what it is doing right now. Moving, slowly, south to north, without stopping, without changing, without caring about any of it. The flood. Akhet. The first season of the Egyptian year, beginning in June, peaking in September, retreating by November, and leaving behind something extraordinary. Black mud. Rich, dark, impossibly fertile mud. Carried down from the Ethiopian highlands, full of minerals, full of nutrients, full of everything a plant needed to grow. The Egyptians called it Kemet, the Black Land, and it was, in the most literal sense, life itself. On one side of the black land, the river. On the other side, the desert. And that was Egypt. Everything, the whole civilization, squeezed into that thin strip of black mud between the water and the sand. Never more than a few miles wide, in places, barely one. Here's the part that surprises people. The Egyptians didn't just live beside the Nile, they organized their entire world around it. The calendar, 3 seasons, not spring, summer, autumn, winter. Akhet, the flood. Peret, the growing season. Shemu, the harvest. Everything running on the river's rhythm, not on the sun, not on the moon, on the water. Their entire sense of direction organised around the river. North, downstream. South, upstream. East and west, the sunrise side and the sunset side. Not abstract compass points, real, physical, felt in the body. The river telling you where you were at every moment. The Nile, not just a river, the spine of the world. Now, let's meet the river. Not from above, not from a map. From the bank. Stand here for a moment. The pre-dawn light, grey and still. The water moving past, slowly. Not the rushing urgency of a mountain river. The Nile moved, the way something moves when it has all the time in the world. Which it did. Which it does. The surface of it, dark, almost black in this light, reflecting the sky above, pink now at the edges, where the sun was beginning its approach. The smell of it, distinctive, green, muddy, ancient. The smell of water that had been moving since before there were people to smell it. 5 million years of river, and you, standing at the edge of it. The animals, because the Nile was not empty, not by any measure. Crocodiles. The ancient Egyptians knew about crocodiles, in the way you know about something that could kill you, but usually didn't. Respectfully, carefully, with one eye always open. They had a crocodile god, Sobek, depicted with a crocodile head and a human body, which is either a sign of deep respect or a very specific. The boats, because the Nile was not just water, it was the highway. Ancient Egypt had, in practical terms, no roads. Not significant ones. Not the way Rome had roads. Not the way the Silk Road had roads. What Egypt had was the river. And the river ran the length of the country. If you wanted to go north, you got in a boat, and the current carried you. If you wanted to go south, you got in a boat, raised your sail, and the prevailing wind blew you upstream. The Egyptians noticed this, early, that the current ran north and the wind blew south, that the river, in both directions, worked with you, not against you, with you, as if designed, as if the whole system had been arranged. Their hieroglyph for travelling north was a boat with no sail, just going with the current. Their hieroglyph for travelling south was a boat with a sail raised. The direction of travel encoded in the image of how you travelled, the river in the language itself, the flood season. Let's spend time here, because the flood was not just an agricultural event, it was everything. When the waters rose, the fields disappeared. The villages, built on slightly higher ground, became islands. The farmers, who had been working the fields, suddenly had nothing to do. Which sounds relaxing. It wasn't, because this is when the state called them. This is when the great projects happened. The temples, the tombs, the pyramids, all built primarily during flood season, when the farmers had no fields to tend, when the Nile conveniently floated the enormous stone blocks directly to the building sites, the flood making the impossible merely very difficult. The river not just feeding Egypt, building it. And then the waters receded. November, the flood pulling back, slowly, leaving behind the black mud and something else, something the Egyptians watched for every single year with the intensity of people whose lives depended on it. The Nilometer, a measuring device carved into the riverbank or built as a column in the river itself, marked with gradations, measuring how high the flood had risen. And this measurement was everything. Too low a flood, not enough silt, not enough water, poor harvest, famine. Too high a flood, villages swept away, crops destroyed, also famine. Just right, the perfect flood, and Egypt ate. The whole country, holding its breath, watching a line on a stone, waiting to find out what kind of year it was going to be. The most important measurement in the ancient world, a line on a rock, in a river. The black land and the red land, Kemet and Deshret. This distinction was not just geographical, it was everything. The black land, life, fertility, home, the place where people lived and worked and prayed and died. The red land, the desert, was the opposite of all of those things. The place where nothing grew, where nothing lived, where you went only if you had to, and where, interestingly, you buried your dead. Because the desert preserved things, the dry heat pulling moisture from everything, making the impossible possible, making bodies last, making papyrus last, making wood and cloth and paint last, making the ancient world visible to us 4,000 years later. The desert, the enemy of the living, the preserver of the dead, the reason we know anything at all. The Nile at evening. Let's end here, because this is the image I want to leave with you. The sun going down over the western desert, red and gold on the water, the river catching it, holding it for a moment before the dark came. The felucca sails, those triangular white sails, turning gold in the last light, moving slowly, always slowly, downstream, the current carrying them without effort. The fishermen, not rowing, just going. The way the river went, the way the river always went, south to north, highland to sea, always. And on the banks, the villages settling, the cooking fires starting, the smell of bread baking somewhere, the children coming in from wherever children went during the day, the animals being brought in from the fields, the world contracting, getting smaller, getting warmer, getting closer. The Nile in the evening, the oldest view in human history, still there, still moving, still carrying everything toward the sea. The river is moving. It always moves, south to north, without stopping, without asking permission. Let the current carry you, the way it carried everything, the boats, the silt, the seasons, just going, the way the river went. Chapter 2 is waiting, the farmer in the mud, who worked 4 months a year and spent the other 8 doing something that will completely surprise you, but only when you need it. The river is enough for now. Let it carry you. The most common image of ancient Egypt is wrong. The slaves, hauling stones under the whip of an overseer, the suffering masses building monuments for a god-king who didn't care if they lived or died. That image? Wrong. The Egyptian farmer worked approximately 4 months a year. 4 months. Planting, tending, harvesting, and the other 8 months? The other 8 months, he built things. Not because he was forced to, not because soldiers came to his village with weapons, because the state fed him, housed him, gave him medical care, paid him in bread and beer, and asked him, in return, to help build the most extraordinary structures the ancient world had ever seen. Not slaves, workers, fed, housed, cared for, and building something that would last forever. But first, the 4 months. Because before the pyramids, before the temples, before anything else, there was the mud. And the mud was everything. Let's call our farmer Amenhotep, because half of ancient Egypt was named Amenhotep. He lives in a small village on the west bank of the Nile, a cluster of mud brick houses, a few palm trees, some goats, children everywhere. The village so close to the river that during flood season the water came almost to the doorsteps. Almost. The village built on slightly higher ground for exactly this reason. Every Egyptian village built on slightly higher ground for exactly this reason. Because the people who built them had seen what happened to the ones that weren't. The river, generous and unforgiving, simultaneously. Amenhotep wakes before dawn, not because he set an intention, not because he was a morning person, because the field was waiting. And the field did not wait patiently. The window of planting after the flood receded was specific. The mud was perfect for a certain number of weeks. Wet enough to work, not so wet it couldn't be walked on. And then it dried, cracked, became hard, and the window closed. You planted in that window, or you didn't plant. And if you didn't plant, you didn't eat. And if you didn't eat, the tax collector arrived anyway. The mud, not forgiving of delays. He steps outside, into the pre-dawn air, which, in Egypt, was not cold exactly, but cooler than the day would be. Much cooler. The difference between night and day in Egypt was significant. The desert cooling rapidly after sunset, the stone and sand releasing their heat, the temperature dropping, sometimes 20 degrees, between noon and midnight. The pre-dawn, the best part of the Egyptian day, the only part that felt manageable. He looked at the field, the black mud glistening in the first grey light, the Nile visible beyond it, still carrying the last of the floodwaters, moving slowly past. The birds already working, ibis in the shallows, herons at the edge, the whole riverbank alive with the business of eating, and Amenhotep watching all of it for just a moment before the day began. The Egyptian farmer always pausing at the edge of the field, just for a moment, before the mud took him. The tools, because the Egyptian farmer's tools were simple, elegantly simple, refined over thousands of years into exactly what they needed to be, and nothing more. The hoe, the most important tool in ancient Egypt. Not the sword, not the chariot, the hoe. A handle with a blade attached at an angle, used to break the mud after the flood, to loosen it, to aerate it, to prepare it for the seed. Hours of work, repetitive, physical, the whole body involved, the back, the shoulders, the arms, the mud resisting and then giving, and then resisting again. The same movement 10,000 times across a single field. The hoe, the tool that fed a civilization. Nobody writes epics about the hoe. The wood plough, for larger fields, pulled by oxen if you were lucky enough to have oxen. If not, by other farmers, the neighbours helping. Because in Egypt, as in Japan, as everywhere that food required water, you cooperated, or you didn't eat. What he grew, emmer wheat, the foundation of the Egyptian diet, ground into flour, baked to bread. The bread that was food and currency and offering and medicine simultaneously. In ancient Egypt, bread was not just what you ate, it was what everything was measured in. A worker's daily wage, 10 loaves of bread and 2 jugs of beer. A doctor's fee, paid in bread. A temple offering, bread. The gods themselves fed bread, every morning by the priests, because even the god needed breakfast. Bread, not gold, not silver. Bread was what Egypt ran on. Barley, for beer. And before you get comfortable with that, Egyptian beer was not what you're imagining. Thick, cloudy, more like liquid bread, nutritious, calorie dense, safer than the water, drunk by everyone, children included, from the morning to the evening. The entire civilization, mildly, continuously, sustained by fermented grain, which, honestly, explains some of the art. The irrigation. Here is the part that made Egypt possible, the part that separated Egypt from every other civilization trying to survive in a desert. The Egyptians didn't just farm the Nile's floodplain, they extended it. Canals dug by hand, carrying water from the river further into the desert, turning land that had never grown anything into fields. Basin irrigation. The land divided into shallow basins, surrounded by low earthen walls. The floodwater directed into the basins, held there, soaking in, depositing its silt, and then released. The farmer controlling the flood, not fighting it, not fleeing it, using it, directing it, making it do what he needed. The river, powerful. The farmer, patient. Between them, Egypt. The animals. Because Amenhotep's farm was not just crops, it was alive in every direction. Cattle. The most valuable animals in ancient Egypt, used for ploughing, for milk, for meat, on special occasions. The number of cattle a man owned, a direct measure of his wealth, counted, recorded, taxed. The tax collector knowing exactly how many cattle every farmer had, because the tax collector always knew. Geese, everywhere. The ancient Egyptians loved geese, in the particular way you love something that is both useful and irritating. Eggs, meat, and a constant loud opinion about everything happening around them. Donkeys, the workhorses of ancient Egypt, before horses arrived, carrying loads, turning millstones, moving grain from field to storehouse. The quiet, reliable animal that nobody painted on temple walls, but everybody needed. The donkey, doing more work than the pharaoh and receiving considerably less credit. The midday heat. This is the chapter nobody writes, the part of the Egyptian day that the paintings skip. By mid-morning, the temperature was rising. By noon, it was unreasonable. By early afternoon, it was a physical force, something pressing down on everything, making movement expensive, making thought difficult, making staying still the only sensible option. The Egyptians knew this. They were not foolish. Work stopped at midday, not because anyone decreed it, because the heat decreed it. The animals found shade, the farmers found shade, the children found shade, and everyone, in that particular heavy afternoon heat, slept. The afternoon rest, not laziness, survival. The heat giving everyone permission. The evening, when the heat finally, reluctantly, began to ease, the fields came alive again. The second shift of the Egyptian day, the cooler hours, the productive hours, the hours when you could actually think and move and work without the sun trying to kill you. Amenhotep finishing the last of the hoeing, his back having opinions about this, his feet still carrying the mud from this morning. The mud that was on everything, always on everything, that you stopped trying to remove after a while, because the field was right there, and tomorrow you would be back in it, and the mud would be back on everything, again. He walked back toward the village, the sun going down over the western desert, the sky turning colours that only Egyptian skies turned. That particular orange, almost too orange, the sand in the air, catching the light, making everything, for just a few minutes, gold. The Egyptian evening, worth every hour of the day that preceded it. The evening meal, which was, let's be honest, not varied. Bread, beer, onions, possibly some fish, if the Nile had been generous, possibly some vegetables from the garden beside the house, lentils, garlic, leeks. Simple food, good food, eaten sitting on the ground or on a low mat outside the house, because the house was too hot inside, because the house was always too hot inside, because Egyptian houses were built for shade, not for warmth, and in the evening they held the day's heat like a clay pot. So you ate outside, in the cooling air, the stars beginning to appear above you, the Nile audible somewhere nearby, the village settling around you, the day, finally, letting go. And then the roof. Because in ancient Egypt, the roof was not just the top of the house. It was the bedroom. The houses, mud brick, thick-walled, absorbed the day's heat, released it through the night, making the inside hotter than the outside after dark. So you went up, a simple staircase on the outside of the house, up to the flat roof, where the air moved, where the desert wind, cool now, found you, where the stars, without any competing light, were extraordinary. And you lay down, on a simple mat, your head on a wooden headrest, not a pillow, a carved wooden support, holding your head off the mat, letting the air circulate beneath it. Practical, clever, deeply uncomfortable by modern standards. But after a day in the mud, after the heat, after the bread and the beer, it didn't matter. The body deciding for itself. The roof, the stars, the cool air. Enough. The mud is behind you now. The heat is gone. The stars are out. Let the roof hold you. The cool air, the wooden headrest, or your pillow will let you choose. The Nile somewhere below, moving, always moving, south to north, the way it always moved. Chapter 3 is waiting. The scribes read. 12 years of school, 700 symbols to learn, and a job so prestigious it exempted you from every tax in Egypt. Every single tax. But only when you need it. The stars are out. The roof is cool. The mud will still be there tomorrow. 12 years. That is how long it took to become a scribe in ancient Egypt. 12 years of school, starting at age 5, sometimes younger, ending, if you survived the curriculum, at 17. 17 years old, and finally allowed to pick up the reed and write something that mattered. And what did you study for those 12 years? A writing system with over 700 symbols. 700 symbols. Each one precise. Each one meaningful. Each one requiring years of practice before your hand produced it correctly. 700 symbols and 12 years was considered fast. But here is what made it worth it. Here is the hook that kept boys in school for 12 years, copying symbols onto broken pottery while their friends were outside. The scribe paid no taxes. Not some taxes, not reduced taxes. No taxes. None. Ever. In a civilization where everyone paid taxes, where the tax collector was as certain as the flood, the scribe was exempt. Completely. Permanently. For life. 12 years of school for a lifetime of tax exemption, which, honestly, still sounds like a reasonable trade. Let's talk about what a scribe actually did, because the word conjures something specific. A man with a pen, writing things down, which is accurate, but dramatically undersells it. The scribe was the engine of Egyptian civilization. Everything that made Egypt function ran through the scribe's reed. Tax records, land surveys, medical texts, legal documents, religious ceremonies, military logistics, trade agreements, the building plans for every temple, every pyramid, every palace. All of it written, recorded, filed, stored by scribes. Without the scribes, Egypt was just a hot place with a river. The scribe, not the pharaoh, was what made Egypt, Egypt. The writing system, hieroglyphs, that word that everyone knows. From the Greek, hieros, sacred, and glyphe, carving, sacred carvings, which tells you something important about how the Greeks saw Egyptian writing. not as communication, as something holy. And they weren't wrong. Hieroglyphs were, simultaneously, a practical writing system and a sacred one, used for official inscriptions on temple walls, on tomb walls, on monuments, on everything meant to last. Beautiful, precise, each symbol a tiny work of art. A bird, an eye, a seated man, a folded cloth, a horned viper, over 700 of them, each one carrying meaning, each one requiring a steady hand and years of practice to produce correctly. The most beautiful writing system ever invented, and one of the most difficult to learn. But here's something most people don't know. The scribes didn't use hieroglyphs for everything. Hieroglyphs took time, enormous amounts of time. Carving them into stone, weeks. Even painting them carefully, hours per line, which was fine for temple walls, which was fine for royal tombs, which was completely impractical for a tax record that needed to be written before the farmer left the building. So the scribes developed a shorthand, hieratic script, a cursive version of hieroglyphs, flowing, fast, written with a reed pen on papyrus or pottery in a fraction of the time. The same symbols, simplified, connected, running together. The way your handwriting is a simplified version of the printed letters you learned in school. Still recognizable, still meaningful, but faster. Much faster. The scribe, always finding the efficient path. Always. The tools. Let's spend time with the tools, because the scribe's palette was one of the most elegant, simple objects in the ancient world. A wooden palette, long, narrow, fitting in the hand. 2 depressions at one end, holding cakes of pigment, black and red. Black for the main text, red for headings, for corrections, for dates, for anything that needed to stand out. The origin of red pen corrections, 4,000 years old. A slot in the palette holding the reed pens. Cut from marsh reeds, trimmed to a point, frayed slightly at the tip to hold the ink. The scribe cutting them himself, knowing exactly the right angle, the right thickness for the work he was doing. Fine lines for hieroglyphs, thicker strokes for hieratic. The tool shaped by the hand that used it. The hand shaped by the tool. The palette and the reed inseparable. The scribe and his tools inseparable. The papyrus, because this deserves its own moment. Papyrus, the plant that grew in the Nile's shallows. Tall, green, triangular stems, cut, sliced into thin strips, laid side by side, then crossed, another layer on top, pressed, dried, hammered flat. The natural sugars in the plant acting as glue, binding the layers together, without any adhesive added. The result? A writing surface that was light, flexible, durable, that could be rolled into scrolls, carried, stored, sent across the country, and that lasted, in the right conditions, for thousands of years. The papyrus, not just paper, the technology that made Egyptian civilization portable, The Egyptians exported papyrus across the ancient world. The word paper, in almost every European language, comes from papyrus. The Greeks called it papyros. The Romans called it papyrus. We call it paper. A word still carrying the Nile inside it. The school. Let's go back to the boy, sitting cross-legged on the floor, his reed pen moving slowly across the pottery shard, the symbol forming imperfectly again. The school for scribes, called the House of Life, per Ankh, was attached to temples, not a separate building, not a separate institution. The school inside the sacred space, learning happening in the shadow of the gods, which was intentional, because writing in Egypt was not a neutral skill. It was sacred. The god Thoth, ibis-headed, was the god of writing, of wisdom, of knowledge. Every time a scribe picked up his reed, he was performing a small act of worship, whether he thought about it or not. The reed, a sacred object. The act of writing, a prayer. What they studied, beyond the symbols. Because 12 years was a long time, and symbols alone didn't fill 12 years. Literature. The great texts of Egyptian culture, copied and recopied until memorized. The maxims of Tehotep, wisdom literature, advice on how to live well. The story of Sinuhe, arguably the first adventure story in human history. A man fleeing Egypt, living among foreigners, longing to return. The human experience, distilled 4,000 years ago. Still recognizable. Still, in every important way, the same story. Mathematics. Because the scribe needed to calculate. Land areas after the flood, the boundaries constantly shifting. Tax rates, building measurements, grain storage calculations. The Rhind mathematical papyrus, a scribe's exercise book, surviving to this day, showing multiplication, division, fractions, geometry. The scribe doing math 4,000 years ago, solving the same problems students solve today. The numbers unchanged. The problems unchanged. The student unchanged. The complaints. Because here is the part I love most about the ancient Egyptian scribes. They complained. In the margins of their practice texts, in letters to each other, in the careful bureaucratic documents that were supposed to be neutral, they complained about the heat, about the students, about the work, about each other. One surviving text, a letter from a senior scribe to a junior one, lists in exhaustive detail everything the junior scribe had done wrong. The papyrus delivered incorrectly, the measurements recorded imprecisely, the letter written in a hand that embarrassed them both. 4,000 years old, and you can still hear the exasperation in it. Some things, genuinely, do not change. The evening, the scribe finishing his work, the last record filed, the last symbol checked, the reed cleaned, carefully, and returned to the pallet. The pallet wrapped, everything in its place. He stretched, the back that had been bent over the pallet all day, the hand that had been moving since morning, the eyes that had been reading tiny symbols in low light for hours, all of it making itself known in the particular way that a day of careful, precise work made itself known. differently from the farmer's ache. Not the mud and muscle ache of physical labour. Something subtler. The tiredness of concentration, of attention held for too long, of a mind that had been present, completely present, all day, and was now gratefully letting go. The reed at rest, the palette closed, the symbols done for today. He walked home, past the temple, the hieroglyphs on its walls catching the last light. Those symbols he had spent 12 years learning. Those 700 marks that were, in some ways, his whole life. And he looked at them, the way you look at something you know completely. Not with awe, not with wonder, with recognition. The way you recognize your own handwriting, your own voice. Something that was entirely yours. 12 years, 700 symbols, and then a lifetime of reading the world. The palette is closed. The reed is at rest. The symbols are on the wall. Let the light fade on the hieroglyphs. Those 700 marks, still there. 4,000 years later, still carrying their meaning, still waiting to be read. Chapter 4 is waiting. The gods who ran everything, over 2,000 of them, for a civilization of 5 million people. And the question that historians have been asking ever since: did the Egyptians actually believe? Or was it something more complicated than that? But only when you need it. The symbols are on the wall. The reed is at rest. You don't have to read anything tonight. In ancient Egypt, the gods were not worshipped. They were employed, not metaphorically, not as a poetic way of describing devotion. Employed. The god Ra had a job. Carry the sun across the sky every day, without fail. The god Happy had a job. Flood the Nile at the right time, at the right level, every year, without fail. The god Thoth had a job. Manage knowledge, record history, keep the universe's accounts. And if the gods failed in their jobs, the Egyptians held them accountable. There are surviving texts of Egyptians arguing with their gods, complaining, demanding answers, threatening to withdraw their offerings. The most practical religion in human history. The gods on contract, the humans, the clients. But here is the question that historians have been asking for 200 years. Did the Egyptians actually believe it? Did they genuinely think that a man with the head of an ibis was managing the universe? Did they truly believe that the sun was a god sailing across the sky in a boat? Did they really think that the flood was a goddess crying? And the answer, which is far more interesting than a simple yes or no, is that belief in ancient Egypt was a completely different thing from what we mean when we use that word. Not faith, not doctrine, something older, something more practical, something more alive. The Egyptian gods were not all powerful. This is the first thing to understand. They were not omniscient. They were not infallible. They were not, in the Christian or Islamic sense, perfect. They made mistakes. They argued with each other. They had favourites. They got tired. They needed feeding. The priests fed the gods every morning, literally. A statue of the god, housed in the innermost sanctuary of the temple, was washed, dressed, anointed with oil. presented with food, every single morning. Because the god needed sustenance. Because without sustenance, the god would weaken. And if the gods weakened, the world weakened with them. The priest feeding the god, not performing a ritual, maintaining the universe. Ma'at. This is the concept at the center of everything in ancient Egypt. The concept that made the gods necessary. The concept that made the pharaoh necessary. The concept that made, in the end, every Egyptian necessary. Ma'at. Usually translated as truth, or justice, or harmony. But it was all of those things simultaneously, and more. Ma'at was the right order of the universe, the way things were supposed to be. The flood coming at the right time, the sun rising in the east, the stars moving in their correct paths, the king ruling justly, the farmer planting in the right season, the scribe recording accurately. All of it, the whole vast, complicated system of existence in its proper place, functioning, balanced, right. Ma'at, not a god exactly, more than a god, the condition that made gods possible. And the opposite of Ma'at was Isfet, chaos, disorder, the undoing of everything. The ancient Egyptians believed, genuinely, that chaos was the natural state of the universe, that order had to be maintained, actively, daily, by everyone. The pharaoh performing the rituals, maintaining Ma'at. The priests feeding the gods, maintaining Ma'at. The farmer planting correctly, maintaining Ma'at. The scribe recording accurately, maintaining Ma'at. Every person in their proper role, doing their proper work, was holding the universe together. Every person who failed in their role was letting chaos in. Not a metaphor, not a philosophical concept, a daily, practical urgency. Now, let's meet some of the gods, because 2,000 is too many to cover, but a few deserve a moment. Ra, the sun god, the most important god in the Egyptian pantheon for most of its history, depicted as a man with the head of a falcon, wearing a sun disk. Every morning, Ra sailed across the sky in his solar bark, his boat, carrying the sun from east to west. Every evening, he descended into the underworld, where he had to fight his way through 12 hours of darkness, battling the chaos serpent Apophis, who tried every night to swallow the sun, to end the world. Every night, the same battle. Every morning, Ra winning, the sun rising, the world continuing. Every sunrise, a victory. Every single one. Osiris, the god of the dead, and the most beloved god in the Egyptian pantheon, which tells you something about ancient Egypt, that their most beloved god was the one who ruled the afterlife. The story of Osiris was the story that every Egyptian knew. Osiris, good king, murdered by his brother Set, his body scattered across Egypt, found and reassembled by his wife Isis, brought back not to full life, but to a kind of life. The ruler of the dead, the promise to every Egyptian that death was not the end, that what happened to Osiris could happen to them, that the body preserved, the name remembered, the heart weighed against the feather of Ma'at could pass into eternity. The most comforting story in the ancient world, told every day for 3,000 years. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, of the transition between life and death, who weighed the heart of the deceased against the feather of Ma'at, who guided the soul through the underworld, who protected the mummy in its tomb. The Egyptians noticed that jackals gathered around burial sites, scavenging, and rather than seeing this as sinister, they made it sacred. The jackal, guardian of the dead, the scavenger, protector. The thing that most cultures would have found disturbing, made holy, made meaningful, made comforting. The Egyptian gift for finding the sacred in the unexpected place. The temple. Let's go inside, because the temple was not a place of public worship, not in the way a church or a mosque is, not open to everyone, not a community gathering space. The temple was the god's house. Literally, the god lived inside, in the innermost sanctuary, in the statue, which was not a representation of the god, but the god itself. The divine presence, housed in stone, and only the priests could enter. The outer courts, accessible to some, the inner halls to fewer, the sanctuary to almost no one, the high priest alone entering the innermost room where the god lived, backing out afterward, sweeping away his footprints so that no trace of human presence remained. The god needing privacy, as anyone does in their own home. The ordinary Egyptian and the gods, because if the temple was the god's private house, how did ordinary people access the divine? Through everything else. The household shrine. Every Egyptian home, no matter how modest, had a small shrine, a niche in the wall, a painted figure, a simple offering, bread, beer, flowers, the family gods, Bes and Taweret, the household protectors. Bes, a dwarf god, leonine face, protector of children and pregnant women, depicted on bedroom walls, on headrests, on the objects closest to sleep and birth and vulnerability. Not a grand cosmic deity, a small, intimate household god, present in the most ordinary moments. The gods, not only in the temple, in the bedroom, on the headrest, in the moment between waking and sleep. The festivals. Because here is where the ordinary Egyptian finally got access to the great gods. On festival days, and there were many, the god left the temple, carried out in a sacred bark, a model boat, on the shoulders of the priests, processed through the streets, the whole town coming out, music, dancing, food, beer. The god, briefly, among the people, and people could approach, ask questions of the oracle, present petitions. The god carried past them, and they reached out, not to touch, but to be near, to be in the presence of something vast and ancient and powerful that had come down from its sanctuary to walk among them. The festival, the one day, the god came to the people, instead of the other way around. The evening prayer, because the gods were not only for the temple, not only for the festival, not only for the priest. The Egyptian day began with the gods and ended with them. The morning prayer to Ra as the sun rose. Thank you for returning. Thank you for winning again. Thank you for another day. The evening prayer as the sun set over the western desert. Safe journey through the darkness. Come back. Please, come back. The prayer Not performance, genuine anxiety. Every sunset, a small uncertainty. Every sunrise, a genuine relief. And then, the household shrine, the last offering of the day. Bread, beer, a small flame. The family gathered, the gods present in the niche in the wall, watching, as they always watched, as they would always watch. The night coming, and the gods, as always, managing it. The gods are watching, as they always watched. The shrine is lit, the offering made, the night in good hands. Let the gods manage the dark tonight, the way they always did, for 3,000 years, without fail, without missing a single sunrise. Chapter 5 is waiting. The pyramid builders, who they actually were, what they ate, how they lived, and the evidence discovered in 1990 that changed everything. We thought we knew about the ancient world's greatest construction project, but only when you need it. The gods have the night. The shrine is lit. You don't have to do anything at all. In 1990, a tourist's horse stumbled on a hidden wall near the Giza Plateau. Archaeologists were called. They started digging, and what they found changed everything. We thought we knew about the ancient world's greatest construction project. Not a slave camp, not a prison, not the evidence of forced labour and mass suffering that 200 years of assumption had built up. A city, a real city, with bakeries and breweries and medical facilities and cemeteries where the workers were buried with care and ceremony, with graffiti on the walls left by the work gangs naming themselves the Friends of Khufu, the Drunkards of Menkaure. The Drunkards of Menkaure, 4,500 years ago, and they had a nickname. Let's start with who they were, because this matters. This matters enormously. The pyramid builders were not slaves. We know this, not from assumption, not from wishful thinking, but from the evidence. The skeletal remains found in the workers' cemetery show healed fractures, bones broken and set, injuries treated, people given time to recover. Slaves were not given time to recover. Slaves were not buried with care, in marked graves, near the monuments they built. These workers were. They were conscripted labourers, rotating in and out, serving their required time, the way Amenhotep served his 8 flood season months. Fed, housed, paid. Part of the great Egyptian system that traded labour for sustenance, that built the most recognisable structures in human history, not through suffering, but through organisation. The scale. Let's be honest about the scale, because no amount of organisation makes the pyramid anything other than extraordinary. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, built around 2560 BC, 2,300,000 stone blocks, each one weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons. The total weight, approximately 6 million tons. Height, 146 metres. The tallest structure on Earth for 3,800 years. 3,800 years. Nothing taller until the Lincoln Cathedral in England in 1311 AD and built, not in centuries, but in approximately 20 years. 20 years. Which means, to complete it on time, workers had to place one block every 2 minutes. Every 2 minutes. Around the clock. For 20 years. How? This is the question. The question that has consumed historians and engineers and enthusiastic amateurs for 200 years. And the honest answer, the genuinely honest answer, is that we don't entirely know. We have good theories, strong theories, theories supported by evidence, but not certainty, not complete certainty. What we do know from paintings and models and surviving tools is this: ramps. The blocks were moved on sledges, wooden sledges, pulled by teams of workers, lubricated, and this is real, with water. A team of workers pouring water in front of the sledge, reducing friction, allowing the enormous weight to slide. An experiment in 2014, using ancient Egyptian techniques, confirmed it. The water making the sand act almost like a liquid, the sledge moving with a fraction of the effort of dry sand. Simple, elegant, obvious once you knew. The worker's day. Let's spend time here, because this is where the humanity of it becomes real. They woke before dawn. Of course they did. Everyone in ancient Egypt woke before dawn. The heat demanding it, the work demanding it. The whole civilization organised around the cooler hours. Breakfast first. Bread. Always bread. The bakeries in the workers' village, enormous. Archaeologists found them and were staggered by the scale. Enough bread being produced daily to feed 10,000 workers. 10,000 people eating bread every morning beside the pyramids. The smell of it, baking in the pre-dawn dark, drifting across the plateau. Warm, real, human. And beer, always beer. The workers received a daily ration, bread and beer, the fundamental Egyptian meal. But also, and this surprised the archaeologists, meat, beef, sheep, goat, high-quality protein for people doing high-intensity physical labour. The pyramid builders ate better than most ordinary Egyptians because the state needed them strong, because a weak worker placed blocks slowly, and they needed one block every 2 minutes. The organisation, because the pyramid was not just a construction project, it was a logistical achievement as extraordinary as the architecture itself. The workforce divided into gangs, each gang a named unit. The Friends of Khufu, 20 men working together, competing, apparently, with the other gangs. Who placed more blocks? Who worked faster? Who earned the right to carve their name on the wall? The drunkards of Menkora, clearly proud of whatever reputation had earned them that name. Above the gangs, overseers. Above the overseers, master builders. Above the master builders, the vizier, the pharaoh's right hand, the man responsible, ultimately, for ensuring that one block was placed every 2 minutes, every day, for 20 years. The weight of that responsibility, almost as heavy as the blocks themselves. The injuries, because building a pyramid was dangerous, obviously. Catastrophically dangerous by modern standards. Crushed limbs, falls, the herniated spines of men who spent years carrying impossible weights, all of it visible in the bones, in the workers' cemetery. But here is what is also visible in those same bones. The injuries healed, the fractures set correctly, the amputations performed and survived. Evidence of surgical intervention, 4,500 years old, that worked. The workers' village had physicians, real physicians. The same medical knowledge we'll explore in Chapter 8, applied here to the men building the monuments, the state investing in the health of its workers, because healthy workers built pyramids, and injured workers did not. The afternoon. By noon, the work stopped. The heat on the exposed Giza plateau, making continued labour not just uncomfortable, but fatal. Men rested in the shade of the workers' village, in the shadow of the monuments they were building. The irony of it, the pyramid providing shade for the people building it. They slept, the way everyone in Egypt slept, in the afternoon. The heat, the great equalizer. Pharaoh and pyramid builder, both horizontal, both surrendering to the same sun. And in the late afternoon, when the heat eased, the work resumed. The sledges moving again, the ramps alive with activity, the sound of the plateau, the sound that had been ongoing for years, for decades, resuming. The tap of tools on stone, the calls of the overseers, the groan of the sledges, the sound of a civilization building its own eternity. The evening, the work stopping at sunset, the plateau emptying, the workers returning to the village, to the bread and the beer, to the small mud brick houses where they lived for the months of their service. Some of them far from home, villages up and down the Nile represented here. The farmer from the delta, the fisherman from the south, the craftsman from a town whose name is now forgotten. All of them together on this plateau, building this thing. And in the evening, after the bread and the beer, sitting outside the mud brick houses, looking up at what they had built, what was rising, what was becoming, day by day, block by block, one every 2 minutes, for 20 years. Did they understand what they were building? Did they know, in any meaningful sense, that 4,500 years later, their work would still be standing? That people from the other side of the earth would travel just to look at it? That their names, the friends of Khufu, the drunkards of Menkaura, would still be readable on the walls they left them on? Probably not. Probably it was just the work, the bread, the beer, the block every 2 minutes, the gang beside you, the overseer above you, the sun going down over the western desert, and tomorrow, the same, the legacy. Let's end here, not with the pharaoh, not with the god the pyramid was built for, with the worker, the man whose name we almost didn't know, whose existence was assumed for 200 years to be misery, who turned out, when we finally looked properly, to have been fed, housed, cared for, named, remembered, in the graffiti on the walls, in the bones in the cemetery, in the bread moulds in the bakery, in every piece of evidence that said, these were people, real people, with nicknames, with pride in their work, with injuries that were treated, with lives that mattered to someone, even then. The drunkards of Menkaure, still here, 4,500 years later, still here. Let the plateau settle into night. The pyramids pale against the dark sky, the workers long gone, the bread eaten, the beer drunk, the blocks placed, the day done. Chapter 6 is waiting. The desert at the edge, the red land, the place the Egyptians feared more than anything, and used more cleverly than anyone expected, but only when you need it. The plateau is quiet. The pyramids are standing. They will still be standing in the morning. You could cross it in a single step, one step from the black land to the red land, from life to not life, from the world to the edge of the world. The ancient Egyptians called it Deshret, the red land, and they were genuinely afraid of it. Not the performative fear of people who had never been there, the intimate fear of people who lived beside it every day of their lives, who knew exactly what it was capable of, who had seen what happened to the things it touched. And yet, the desert was also, in ways the Egyptians understood better than anyone, extraordinarily useful. Let's start with what the desert actually was, not the romantic version, not the cinematic version, the real version. The Sahara Desert, the largest hot desert on Earth, surrounded Egypt on both sides, east and west. The eastern desert, between the Nile and the Red Sea, rocky, mountainous, full of minerals and precious stones, amethyst, emerald, gold. The western desert, the truly terrifying one, flat, featureless, extending for thousands of miles, with almost no water, almost no life, almost no way to know where you were. In the western desert, you could walk for days and see nothing change. The same sand, the same sky, the same horizon, always the same distance away. The desert playing tricks on a mind that needed landmarks, that needed difference, that needed something to hold on to. The heat. Not the heat of an Egyptian summer afternoon. That was uncomfortable. This was different. The desert heat was a physical force, not temperature alone. Temperature combined with the complete absence of shade, combined with the reflection of the sun off the sand, hitting you from below as well as above, combined with the desiccating wind pulling moisture from your body faster than you could replace it. A person in the open desert, without water, in summer, could be dead in hours, not days, hours. The Egyptians knew this, had always known this. The desert was not a place you entered casually, not a place you entered alone, not a place you entered without water, without guides, without the specific knowledge of where the next oasis was. And even then, you were careful, very careful, because the desert didn't care how careful you were. The Egyptian attitude toward the desert. This is where it gets interesting. Because the Egyptians didn't just fear the desert, they had a theology about it. The desert was the domain of Set, the god of chaos, of storms, of the foreign, of everything that was not Egypt. Set, depicted with the head of an unidentifiable animal, perhaps a composite, something the Egyptians saw as belonging to the desert, to the unmappable edges of the world. Not entirely evil. Set was powerful, necessary even. Ra needed Set on his solar bark to fight the chaos serpent Apophis every night. The destroyer in service of the creator. The desert, not pure evil, but pure danger. A force that had to be respected, managed, never underestimated. But here is the contradiction. Here is the thing that makes ancient Egypt perpetually fascinating. The desert they feared, they also needed, desperately, in ways that shaped everything about their civilization. The gold. The eastern desert was full of it. Gold mines worked for thousands of years. The gold that covered the temples, the tombs, the burial masks. The gold that made Egypt, in the ancient world's imagination, synonymous with wealth. All of it pulled from the desert, by workers who went into the Red Land and came back carrying the thing that made the pharaoh divine. The stone, the great temples and pyramids and monuments built from stone quarried in the desert. Granite from Aswan, limestone from the plateau, sandstone from the eastern desert. The desert providing the raw material for every permanent thing Egypt ever built. And the preservation, this is the most remarkable gift the desert gave. Bodies buried in the desert sand before the development of elaborate mummification were naturally preserved. The dry heat pulling moisture from the tissues, stopping decomposition, leaving the body desiccated but intact. The face still recognizable, the hair still present, the skin still covering the bones. The earliest Egyptians discovered this by accident. Burial pits exposed by desert wind, revealing bodies that should have been dust, but weren't. And from this accident, an entire theology developed. If the body could be preserved, the soul could return to it. If the soul could return, the person could live again. If the person could live again, death was not the end. The desert, the feared Red Land, the domain of chaos, accidentally giving Egypt its most profound belief. The thing they feared most gave them their greatest hope. The oases. Because the desert was not entirely without mercy, not entirely without water. Scattered across the western desert, like impossible promises, the oases. Siwa, Bahariya, Dakhla, places where the water table came close enough to the surface that wells could be dug, that palms could grow, that life could exist in the middle of nothing. The oases, trade routes, waypoints, places where caravans rested, where water was replenished, where the desert briefly allowed you through. The Siwa oasis, famous throughout the ancient world. The oracle of Amun there, consulted by Alexander the Great himself, who crossed the desert specifically to hear what it said. The oasis, so remote, so unreachable, that the gods who spoke there were considered particularly honest, particularly clear, because the desert had stripped away everything else. leaving only the truth. The desert at night. This is what I want to give you before we leave the Red Land, before we return to the river. The desert at night was a completely different place from the desert by day. The heat gone, replaced by cold. The same sand that burned your feet at noon, now cold against your back. The sky, without any moisture in the air to diffuse the light, without any competing brightness anywhere. Absolutely extraordinary. More stars than you have ever seen, more stars than seemed possible. The Milky Way, not a suggestion, not a smear of light, a river of stars, overhead from horizon to horizon. The ancient Egyptians saw this every night, looked up at this every night, and did what humans always do, with something too vast to ignore. They made it mean something. The Milky Way, in ancient Egyptian belief, was the body of the goddess Nut, the sky goddess, arched over the earth, her body forming the vault of heaven, the stars, her skin. Every night, Nut swallowed the sun. Every morning, she gave birth to it again. The sky, not empty space, a goddess, present, alive, breathing. Her body, the thing you looked up at every night when you lay on your rooftop watching the stars move. And the desert, the feared Red Land, the domain of Set, was where you came if you wanted to see her clearly. Away from the river, away from the fires, away from everything that competed with the dark. The desert, for all its terror, giving the clearest view of the heavens, the clearest view of the goddess above. Visual cue, the goddess Nut on the tomb ceiling, her body arched, the stars on her skin, the sky made personal, made divine, made present. The Milky Way was the body of the goddess Nut, arched over the earth, the stars her skin, the sky alive. The figure at the edge, the one we started with, standing at the border of the black land and the red, looking out into the desert, not going in, not today, just looking, the way the Egyptians always looked at the desert, with respect, with wariness, with the particular awareness of something that could end you if you forgot, for a moment, what it was. But also, perhaps, with something else. The knowledge that inside that terrifying red expanse was gold, was stone, was the preservation of everything they loved, was the clearest view of the night sky anywhere on earth, was, in the end, the thing that made Egypt possible. He turns, back toward the river, back toward the black land, back toward the bread and the beer and the familiar mud. The desert behind him, always behind him, always there. Visual cue, the figure turning back toward the Nile, the desert behind him, the river ahead, the green strip of life, the return. The desert, always behind them, always there, the thing that made Egypt possible and the thing that could end you. Let the desert go quiet now, the red land settling into night, the sand cooling, the stars appearing one by one above the goddess Nut, the river somewhere ahead, moving, always moving. Chapter 7 is waiting, the market at the river, the noise and the colour and the smell of an Egyptian marketplace, where bread was money, where the whole economy ran on barter, and where the most important transaction of any given day happened before the sun reached its height, but only when you need it. The desert is quiet, the stars are out, the goddess is above you. Ancient Egypt had no money, no coins, no currency, no system of exchange that involved a standardized medium of value. For most of its 3,000-year history, the most sophisticated civilization on Earth ran entirely on barter, which sounds primitive, which sounds like a significant limitation, until you understand what they used instead. Bread, and the economy that grew up around it, was, in its own way, as sophisticated as anything that came after. The barter economy. Let's understand how it actually worked, because barter, in the popular imagination, is chaotic. Two people meeting, haggling, eventually agreeing that 3 fish equals 1 pot. Random, inefficient, unreliable. The Egyptian system was none of those things. Everything had a value, a standardized value, expressed in units called daben. A daben, a weight of copper, approximately 90 grams. Not a coin, not something you carried around and exchanged. A unit of account, a way of saying, this jar of oil is worth 5 deben. This length of linen is worth 10 deben. This cow is worth 120 deben. Everything on the same scale, everything comparable, everything tradable. The bread, back to the bread. Because bread was not just one of the things traded, it was the foundation of the entire system. A worker's daily wage, 10 loaves of bread and 2 jugs of beer. That was the baseline, the minimum. Everything else measured against it. A skilled craftsman earned more. A physician earned more. A scribe, tax exempt, earned considerably more. But the unit of measurement, the thing everything was ultimately compared to, was bread. Which meant, if you wanted to buy something at the market and you didn't have the exact goods the seller wanted, you could always fall back on bread. Bread, the universal currency, the thing everyone needed, the thing everyone accepted, the thing that made the whole system work, the market itself. Let's walk through it, because the Egyptian market was not a quiet affair. It gathered, typically, at the riverbank, for obvious reasons. The boats bringing goods from up and down the Nile, unloading directly into the market space. No roads needed, no carts required. The river, as always, doing the work. The smell of it first. Always the smell first. Fish. The Nile producing extraordinary quantities of fish, tilapia, catfish, perch, dried or salted or fresh, piled on reed mats in the early morning, before the heat changed the equation. Onions, everywhere. The ancient Egyptians were devoted to onions, in a way that goes beyond culinary preference. Onions were found in tombs, placed in the eye sockets of mummies sometimes, depicted in tomb paintings alongside the finest foods. The reason, possibly, their strong smell, thought to have magical properties, capable of reviving the dead. Or possibly, the ancient Egyptians simply really liked onions. Both explanations have archaeological support. The goods, what was being traded, told you everything about how Egypt worked. Grain, always grain. The fundamental commodity, stored in state granaries, redistributed through the market system, the backbone of the whole economy. Linen. Egyptian linen was remarkable. Made from flax, grown beside the Nile, processed into fabric of extraordinary fineness. The finest Egyptian linen, almost transparent. So fine that later Greek writers described it with something approaching disbelief. Traded across the ancient world, worth significant amounts of daben. A length of good linen, as valuable as a month's wages. Pottery. Clay vessels of every size and purpose, for storage, for cooking, for carrying water. The potter's wheel, one of the great technologies of the ancient world, producing vessels with a regularity and consistency that still impresses today. And faience, the distinctive blue-green glazed ceramic that was everywhere in ancient Egypt, on jewellery, on amulets, on small figurines, that particular colour, the colour of the Nile, the colour of the sky, the colour of rebirth, on everything. The traders, who were they, these people, running the Egyptian market? Not a merchant class in the way feudal Japan had merchants, not a specialised group of people whose entire identity was trade. Everyone traded. The farmer bringing surplus grain, the fisherman bringing the morning's catch, the potter bringing yesterday's firing, the linen weaver bringing the cloth she had spent a week producing. All of them at the market, looking for what they needed, offering what they had. The negotiation, conducted in a way the Egyptians had refined over centuries. Not aggressive, not confrontational. A conversation. I have this. I need that. What can we arrange? The deben providing the framework, the bread providing the fallback, and the river moving past, carrying more goods, more boats, more possibility with every passing hour. The scribes at the market, because, of course, there were scribes. There were always scribes. Recording the transactions, the tax on goods sold, the state taking its share, as the state always took its share, of everything that moved through Egypt. The scribe sitting at the edge of the market, pallet on his knee, reed moving, recording the flow of goods, the way water was recorded flowing through irrigation channels, precisely, continuously, without sentiment. This jar of oil sold for 5 deben, the state's portion noted. This length of linen exchanged for grain, both sides recorded. The market, not just an economic event, an administrative one. Everything in ancient Egypt recorded. Everything in ancient Egypt taxed. The luxury goods. Because the market was not only for everyday things. Egypt traded across the ancient world. The caravans arriving from the south, from Nubia, bringing gold, ivory, ebony, exotic animals, leopard skins. The incense burned in every temple in Egypt, coming from Punt, a place so distant its exact location is still debated by historians. Somewhere on the East African coast, or perhaps the Arabian Peninsula. The Egyptians called it the land of the gods, because the incense from Punt was so extraordinary, so essential to religious practice, that it could only have come from somewhere divine. Queen Hatshepsut, the great female pharaoh, sent an entire expedition to Punt. 5 ships, a diplomatic mission, returning with 31 living myrrh trees, their roots carefully balled, to be planted in the temple gardens. The first recorded attempt at transplanting trees, 4,000 years ago. The Egyptians always finding the elegant solution. The luxury goods arriving, the caravans, the boats from the south, the exotic materials, the extraordinary things that the market also contained. Queen Hatshepsut sent ships to the land of the gods, returning with living myrrh trees, roots balled for transplanting. The first recorded attempt. The midday quiet, because by noon the market slowed. The heat doing what the heat always did. The serious trading done in the cooler morning hours. The goods mostly moved. What remained? The reduced price items. The fish that needed to go today. The bread from this morning that wouldn't be good tomorrow. The last negotiations of the day, conducted in the shade, half-heartedly, by people who were already thinking about lunch. And then, the market emptying. The reed mats rolled up. The goods unsold, carried back to the boats. The scribes finishing their records. The Nile flowing past, exactly as it had been flowing before the market started, indifferent to all of it. Tomorrow, the boats would come again. The mats would be laid out again. The fish would be piled again. The scribes would sit again, pallet on knee, recording the endless flow of an economy that had been running without coins, without banks, without paper money, for 3,000 years. The evening, Amenhotep, our farmer, walking home from the market, his surplus grain traded for the linen he needed, for the oil he was running low on, for the small faience amulet, blue-green, that his wife had asked for, the colour of the Nile, the colour of rebirth, small enough to hold in one hand, worth, in Deben, less than a day's wages, but carried home carefully, wrapped in linen, as if it was something precious, because to her it was, because the gods were in everything in ancient Egypt, even in a small blue-green piece of glazed ceramic, even in the market, even in the transaction, even in the walk home, beside the river, in the evening light. The market done, the amulet in his hand, the river moving beside him, everything in its right place. Let the market settle into evening, the goods traded, the Deben calculated, the scribes finished, the Nile flowing past, as it always flowed. Chapter 8 is waiting, the physician's house, the ancient Egyptian doctors, who were so respected that foreign kings sent for them specifically. And some of what they knew was genuinely correct. Some of it was genuinely extraordinary, and some of it was entirely something else. But only when you need it. The amulet is blue-green. The river is moving. The evening is enough. Ancient Egyptian surgeons performed brain surgery successfully. We have the skulls to prove it. Not metaphorically, not surgically adjacent. Brain surgery, trepanation, the deliberate removal of a section of the skull to relieve pressure, to treat injury, to address conditions we can only guess at from the evidence left behind. Skulls found with holes cut into them, clean cuts, precise cuts, and, here is the part that changes everything, the bone around the hole showing regrowth, healing, the patient surviving the surgery, living afterward, long enough for the bone to begin growing back. These were not accidents, not injuries, not the marks of violence. Deliberate, careful, successful. 4,000 years ago, in ancient Egypt, someone cut open a human skull and the person lived. Case 6. A gaping wound in the head, reaching the bone. The physician examines it, feels the skull beneath, checks for fracture, notes whether the patient can turn their neck, checks the eyes. Are they normal? Can the patient speak normally? Then, the diagnosis. Then, the treatment. Stitching the wound. Fresh meat applied the first day to reduce inflammation. oil and honey applied afterward to prevent infection. Honey. We talked about honey in our medieval video. Its antimicrobial properties, its ability to keep wounds clean. The ancient Egyptians knew this 3,600 years ago, not from biochemistry, from observation, from the accumulated evidence of wounds that healed and wounds that didn't. And honey reliably helped them heal. The Egyptian physician. Let's understand who he was and what he actually did. The word for physician in ancient Egyptian, swinu, appears in texts going back to the earliest dynasties. A respected profession, a specialized profession. Not the village healer with her herbs and her intuition. A trained practitioner who had studied, who had apprenticed, who had learned from texts and from teachers and from years of watching what worked and what didn't. And they were organized. They were physicians for specific parts of the body, a specialist for the eyes, a specialist for the stomach, a specialist for the teeth. The ancient Egyptians inventing specialization in medicine 4,000 years before anyone else thought of it. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting Egypt centuries later, noted this with amazement. Every physician, he wrote, treats only one disease. The country is full of physicians, some for the eyes, some for the head, some for the teeth, some for the stomach, some for hidden diseases. The diagnoses. The Edwin Smith papyrus is remarkable, in part because of how the physician approached each case. Not with prayer first, not with magic first, with examination first. Look at the patient, touch the patient, ask the patient questions, note what you find. Then, and only then, decide what to do. Each case in the papyrus ends with one of three verdicts. An ailment I will treat, an ailment I will fight, an ailment not to be treated. That third verdict is extraordinary. An ailment not to be treated. The ancient Egyptian physician acknowledging that some conditions were beyond his ability. Not reaching for a magical cure, not pretending to knowledge he didn't have. Saying, honestly, this is beyond me. The beginning of medical ethics, 3,600 years ago. The Ebers Papyrus. Because the Edwin Smith papyrus was not the only one. The Ebers Papyrus, purchased in Luxor in 1873, is the longest medical document from the ancient world. Over 110 pages, 700 remedies, covering everything. Stomach complaints, skin conditions, eye diseases, heart conditions, mental illness. Depression, described and treated in ancient Egypt 4,000 years ago. The Ebers Papyrus, describing a condition, a heaviness of the heart, a withdrawal from activity, a loss of pleasure in ordinary things, that any modern psychiatrist would recognize immediately, and offering treatment, conversation, music, encouraging the patient to speak about what troubled them. The world's oldest recorded talking cure. The remedies. Here is where it gets complicated. Because alongside the rational, alongside the clinical, alongside the genuinely impressive, were the other things. Remedies that worked, for reasons the Egyptians understood. Willow bark for pain, garlic for infection, honey for wounds, castor oil, still used today for exactly the same purposes the Egyptians used it. And remedies that worked, possibly for reasons nobody fully understands. And remedies that, almost certainly, did not work at all. A remedy for baldness involving the fat of a hippopotamus. a crocodile, a serpent, and a goose, combined and applied to the scalp, which, for the record, does not cure baldness. We know this with some confidence, but the Egyptians tried and wrote it down, and presumably someone applied hippopotamus fat to their head, hoping. The magic. Because medicine in ancient Egypt was never entirely separate from religion, never entirely separate from magic. Not because the physicians were naive, because in the Egyptian worldview, everything was connected. The physical body and the spiritual body were not separate things. An illness could have a physical cause and a spiritual one simultaneously, and treating only one left the other unaddressed. So the physician, alongside his honey and his linen, also spoke spells, specific words in a specific order, addressing the gods, asking for their intervention alongside the physical treatment, not instead of it, alongside it, both working together. The body treated by the remedy, the spirit treated by the spell, the whole person addressed. The teeth, because here, if anywhere, ancient Egyptian medicine confronted its limits. Dental disease was epidemic in ancient Egypt, not because of sugar. They had very little refined sugar. Because of the bread. The grain ground on stone millstones always contained tiny fragments of grit, sand, stone particles from the grinding process, mixed into every loaf, ground into every mouthful. The teeth of ancient Egyptian mummies, worn flat, ground down to the pulp, in many cases, by middle age. By the time Amenhotep was 40 years old, his teeth were almost certainly causing him significant pain. And the Egyptian physician, for all his knowledge, could not fix this, could treat the pain, could treat the infection, but the underlying cause, the grit in the bread, continued. Every day, every meal, for a lifetime. The reputation. Because the Egyptian physician's reputation extended far beyond Egypt. The kings of the ancient Near East, the Hittites, the Persians, the rulers of Babylon, sent to Egypt specifically requesting Egyptian doctors, not their own physicians, Egyptian ones. One surviving letter from a Hittite king to the pharaoh requests an Egyptian physician to treat a member of the royal court, a specific condition, a specific physician requested by name. The medical knowledge of Egypt, its reputation, spreading across the ancient world, carried by the same trade routes that carried the linen and the grain. The physicians of Egypt, the most trusted doctors in the ancient world. The physician's evening, the last patient seen, the last remedy dispensed, the last spell spoken, quietly, over a sleeping child, whose fever the honey and the garlic were already beginning to address. The physician covering his clay jars, rolling his linen bandages, returning his pallet to its place. The house settling into the evening quiet. He had seen, today, a broken arm, set and splintered, a wound cleaned and dressed, a stomach complaint diagnosed and treated with castor oil. A patient whose condition he recognized immediately as an ailment not to be treated, to whom he had told the truth, gently, with as much care as he had given the others. The work of the day, ordinary, repetitive, each case different, each case, in the end, the same. A person in pain, another person trying to help. The oldest transaction in the world. Still ongoing. 4,000 years later. Still the same. Let the physician's house go quiet. The jars sealed. The remedies at rest. The spell's finished for today. Chapter 9 is waiting. The Nile at night. The stars the Egyptians mapped with such precision that they oriented every major temple to a specific star on a specific date, 1,000 years before the building was completed. The astronomical knowledge that still confounds modern scientists. And the sky goddess Nut, above everything, holding the night together. But only when you need it. The physician has done his work. The house is quiet. The river is moving. The ancient Egyptians built a temple at Abu Simbel, carved directly into a cliff face. 4 colossal statues of Ramesses II guarding the entrance, each one 20 meters tall. Inside, a series of chambers cutting 63 meters into the rock. At the very back, the innermost sanctuary, 4 statues seated in the dark. 3 gods and Ramesses himself seated among them, divine. And twice a year, on 2 specific dates, the sun aligned perfectly with the entrance of the temple, sending a beam of light 63 meters into the rock, illuminating the statues in the innermost sanctuary. 3 of the 4 statues lit by the sun. The 4th, the god of the underworld, deliberately left in darkness. Even on those days, the dates of alignment, October 22nd and February 22nd, believed to correspond to the birthday of Ramesses and his coronation day. The temple built so that the sun itself celebrated the pharaoh. Twice a year, every year, for eternity. To engineer that alignment, you need to know where the sun will be, on a specific date, at a specific time. Centuries, possibly millennia, before the temple is built. Which means the ancient Egyptians knew. They had mapped the sky, tracked the sun, understood its movement with enough precision to aim a temple entrance at a specific sunrise on a specific day and hit it. 4,000 years ago, without telescopes, without computers, without any of the instruments we would consider necessary. Just the sky and the patience to watch it for generations. The Egyptian sky. Let's start here, with what the Egyptians saw when they looked up. No electric light anywhere, no city glow on the horizon, no planes crossing overhead, no competing brightness of any kind, just the sky as it actually was, as it had been since the beginning, as most humans, for most of history, saw it every night, and as almost none of us, in the modern world, ever see it now. The stars, not a suggestion, not a smear of light, present, vivid, individual. Each one a point of light, sharp and clear, in a sky so dark it had texture. And the Milky Way, as we discussed in Chapter 6, not a faint band on the horizon, a river overhead, from horizon to horizon. The body of the goddess Nut, arched above everything, her skin, the stars. What they mapped. The Egyptians, over centuries of careful watching, mapped the sky with extraordinary precision. The star Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, called Sopdet by the Egyptians, depicted as a woman, or as a star, or as a cow with a star between her horns, the most important star in the Egyptian calendar, because Sirius disappeared below the horizon every year for approximately 70 days, and then reappeared, rising just before the sun in the pre-dawn sky. Its first appearance, called the Heliacal Rising, announcing, with remarkable consistency, the coming flood. The Nile would rise approximately 2 weeks after Sirius reappeared, every year, without fail. The star, telling the farmers to prepare. The star, marking the beginning of the Egyptian New Year. The star, connected to Isis, whose tears caused the flood, whose reappearance in the sky announced that the tears were coming. The Decans. Here is where the Egyptian astronomical knowledge becomes genuinely impressive. The Egyptians divided the night sky into 36 sections, each one associated with a specific star or star cluster, called decans. Each decan rising on the eastern horizon at the same time every 10 days. 36 decans covering the 360-day Egyptian calendar. And here is what the Egyptians used them for: telling time. At night, a trained observer watching the eastern horizon could identify which decan was rising and determine, from that, what hour of the night it was. A star clock. The entire sky, a timepiece, readable by anyone who had learned the system, which the priests had, which the astronomers had, which, over time, the scribes and the physicians and the architects had. The sky, not just beautiful, functional, practical, a tool. The ceiling of the tomb. Because the Egyptians didn't just watch the sky, they reproduced it. Inside the tombs of the pharaohs, and later of officials and wealthy citizens, the ceiling was painted with the sky. The stars mapped onto plaster. The decans labelled. The constellations depicted, not as we know them, not as the Greeks drew them, but as the Egyptians saw them, their own shapes, their own stories. The bull, the hippopotamus, the crocodile, the falcon, Egyptian animals, Egyptian gods, in the Egyptian sky. The ceiling of the tomb, a map of where the dead were going. Up, into the sky, into the stars, to travel with Ra on his solar bark, to become, in the Egyptian belief, imperishable stars. The circumpolar stars, the ones that never set, never disappear below the horizon, called the indestructibles. And the dead, the righteous dead, joining them, becoming indestructible, permanent, always there. The orientation of the temples, because Abu Simbel was not unique. Almost every major Egyptian temple oriented to something. A star, a sunrise, a specific astronomical event on a specific date of specific importance. The Temple of Karnak, the largest religious complex ever built, oriented to the winter solstice sunset. The last rays of the shortest day entering the temple, travelling its length, illuminating the sanctuary. The sun, at its weakest, still finding its way to the gods, still making contact, still completing the circuit. The Temple of Dendera, oriented to the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star announcing the flood, aligned with the temple of the goddess Hathor, who was connected to Sirius, connected to rebirth, connected to everything that came after winter. The priests of the sky, because someone had to maintain this knowledge. Someone had to watch, every night, for generations. The astronomer priests, called the followers of Horus, had specific duties. Watching the sky from the temple roof, recording the positions of stars, tracking the movement of the planets, which the Egyptians called the imperishable stars that know no rest. Wandering stars, moving against the fixed background. Calculating the rising of Sirius, predicting the flood, maintaining the calendar, ensuring that the festivals fell on the right days, that the gods received their offerings at the right times, that the universe, that fragile constructed order, Ma'at, continued. The astronomer priest, lying on his back on the temple roof at 3 a.m, watching a specific star cross a specific point in the sky, was not doing astronomy. He was maintaining the world. The river at night. Let's come back to the Nile, because the sky and the river, in Egyptian thought, were mirrors of each other. The sky, a river. The Nile, a reflection of the sky. Ra sailing across the sky in his solar bark, and the pharaoh sailing down the Nile in his royal boat. The same journey on different planes, above and below, heaven and earth, the celestial and the physical, always reflecting each other, always in conversation. And at night, on the Nile, the stars reflected in the water, the sky above, the sky below. The boat moving between them was not a boat on a river, it was a solar bark, moving between the worlds. The sailor, not just a sailor, a traveller, between heaven and earth, between the living and the dead, between the sun that had set and the sun that would rise. Amenhotep, on his rooftop, looking up. He didn't know about decans. He couldn't read the star clock. He wasn't an astronomer priest, tracking the movement of the imperishable stars. He was a farmer who had been in the mud all day, who had eaten his bread and his onions, who was lying on his mat, wooden headrest under his neck, the warm stone of the rooftop beneath him, the cool night air above. But he knew Sirius. Every Egyptian knew Sirius. The star that announced the flood. The star that began the year. He looked for it, every morning, in the weeks before the flood, the way his father had, the way his father's father had, going back, further than anyone could count. The star telling him, without words, without a scribe, without any official announcement, it's coming. Get ready. The year is beginning. Again. The night deepening. The stars moving, slowly, across the sky. The Milky Way, the body of Nut, arching overhead. The Nile below, reflecting it. The desert on both sides, silent. The whole world, held, between water and stars, between the river below and the river above. Amenhotep's eyes, growing heavy. The star clock overhead, marking the hours, whether he read it or not. The decan rising in the east, telling the priests on the temple roof that another hour had passed, that the night was moving, that the sun, somewhere below the horizon, was making its way through the underworld, fighting Apophis, moving toward dawn, moving toward the moment when it would rise again, and the priests would exhale, and the farmers would wake, and the Nile would continue, and Egypt would continue for another day. The stars moving overhead, the river moving below, everything in its right place. Let the sky hold you, the body of Nut above everything, the stars her skin, the river below, reflecting them, the night, ancient and patient, moving at its own pace. Chapter 10 is waiting. The tomb makers, the craftsmen who decorated the Valley of the Kings, who lived in their own village, who left behind the most detailed record of ordinary Egyptian life that survives, and who, in 1170 BC, did something no one had ever done before. They went on strike, but only when you need it. The stars are out. The river is moving. Nut is above you. There is a village in Egypt that has been buried under sand for 2,000 years. Small, hidden in a dry valley on the west bank of the Nile. Not famous, not a pyramid, not a temple, not a monument to any pharaoh. Just a village where workers lived, where workers ate and argued and loved and complained and went to court over stolen pigs, where workers, on one remarkable day, put down their tools and refused to go back. Archaeologists call it Deir el-Medina, and it is, without question, the most important archaeological site for understanding ordinary human life in the ancient world. Not because of what the workers built, because of what they left behind. The documents, the letters, the court records, the love poems, the shopping lists, the absence records, listing the reason one worker didn't come in as simply hungover. The most human village in the ancient world, buried under sand for 2,000 years, waiting. Let's talk about who these people were, because the tomb makers were not ordinary workers. They were artisans, specialists, the most skilled craftsmen in Egypt. Painters, sculptors, draftsmen, carpenters, plasterers. Each one trained from childhood in a specific skill, passed down, father to son, generation after generation, within the village. Their village, called Deir el-Medina, sat in a dry valley on the west bank of the Nile, near Luxor, hidden from view, deliberately. The location of the royal tombs, a state secret. The workers who knew where they were kept close, kept together, kept in a village surrounded by desert that was not quite a prison and not quite a home, and somehow both. The village, Deir el-Medina, is one of the most remarkable archaeological sites in the world. Not because of its size. It was small, approximately 68 houses, at its peak, housing perhaps 400 people. But because of what survived. The dry desert air, preserving everything. Documents, letters, legal records, love poems, shopping lists, complaints to supervisors, divorce settlements, medical records, court cases, the most complete record of ordinary life in the ancient world. Not the life of pharaohs, not the life of priests, the life of workers. People with names, with families, with grievances, with hopes, with, in one surviving document, a detailed account of a man who was absent from work because, and this is the actual reason recorded, he was hungover. The work. Let's understand what they actually did, because painting a tomb in ancient Egypt was not just painting. It was, in the Egyptian understanding, an act of creation. The images on the tomb walls were not decoration. They were reality. Whatever was painted on the walls existed in the afterlife for the deceased. food painted on the walls was food the dead could eat. Servants painted on the walls would serve the dead. Boats painted on the walls could be sailed. The painter, not an artist in the modern sense, a creator, a god-maker almost. Every brushstroke an act of magic. Every image a gift to the dead. Which meant the work had to be correct. Precisely correct. The proportions governed by a grid system, every figure drawn on a precise mathematical framework. The same framework used for 3,000 years. Not because Egyptian art couldn't change, because the magic required consistency. The image had to be recognizable to the gods, to the dead, to the powers that ran the afterlife. Deviations were not artistic choices. They were errors. The process. Because building and decorating a royal tomb took years, sometimes decades. Begun typically at the start of a pharaoh's reign, because nobody knew exactly how long the pharaoh would reign, and the tomb had to be ready when it was needed. The first team, the cutters, cutting into the rock, chisel and mallet. The limestone of the Valley of the Kings soft enough to cut, hard enough to hold detail, producing a fine white dust that settled on everything that the workers breathed every day for their entire working lives. The lung disease that killed many of them, visible in the skeletal remains in the village cemetery. The cost of the work written in the bones. Then the plasterers, smoothing the cut walls, preparing the surface for paint. Then the draftsman, drawing the images on the prepared surface. In red ink first, a preliminary sketch. Then the senior artist, correcting in black. The red sketch underneath, the black correction on top. Then the painters, filling in the colours. The brilliant Egyptian palette, blue from azurite, green from malachite, red from ochre, yellow from orpiment, black from carbon, white from gypsum. Colours that, in the sealed darkness of the tomb, stayed vivid for 4,000 years. The daily life of the village. Because the tomb makers were not only tomb makers, they were a community. The village had its own court. Legal disputes settled internally by a council of senior workers. The surviving court records, extraordinary. A dispute over a stolen pig. A divorce case, the wife claiming her husband had been unfaithful. A property dispute between neighbours over a shared wall. The same disputes in the same proportions as any village in any century. The pig, the unfaithful husband, the wall. Human nature, absolutely unchanged, 4,000 years later. And the love poems. Found at Deir el Medina, some of the most beautiful love poetry in the ancient world. A young man describing his beloved. Her hair, her eyes, the way she walked. His heart, he wrote, leaping up when he saw her, the way a fish leaps in a pond. 4,000 years ago, the same feeling, the same need to put it into words, the same completely human attempt to capture something that couldn't quite be captured. The strike. Let's go back to it, because the details are remarkable. The workers, having walked out, presented their grievances to the local officials. We are hungry. We have no clothing. We have no fish. We have no vegetables. Write to the pharaoh about it. Tell him. The officials, alarmed, tried to send them back. The workers refused. They had been, they explained, patient for months. They had waited. They had given the state time to correct the situation. The state had not corrected the situation. And so, here they were, outside the temple, not working, waiting. Eventually, the authorities provided partial rations. The workers returned. The strike, technically successful. Partially. The grain arriving late, but arriving. The workers back in the valley, back at the walls, back painting the afterlife for a state that had, briefly, failed them, and had been told, clearly, that this was unacceptable. The legacy of Deir el Medina. Because this village, this small hidden community in a dry valley, gave us something irreplaceable. Not the tombs, not the paintings. Those are extraordinary, obviously, but they tell the story the state wanted told, the official story, the divine story. What Deir el Medina gave us was the other story, the human story, the pig theft, the love poem, the absence for being hung over, the strike, the letter from a worker to his son, asking him to come home because his mother missed him, the shopping list, linen, oil, a good knife, the medical record, a sore eye, treated with honey, always honey, the ordinary, irreplaceable, completely human record of people who were alive, who felt things, who wanted things, who complained about things, who wrote love poems, badly probably, but sincerely. 4,000 years ago, in a village hidden in a dry valley, beside the Valley of the Kings. Their names, still in the documents. Their words, still readable, still here. The valley at evening. The workers coming down from the tombs. The tools put away. The paint dried on the brushes, cleaned carefully, stored for tomorrow. The white limestone dust, shaken from the clothing, as best it could be. The walk back to the village, through the dry valley, the desert on both sides, the Nile somewhere ahead, invisible from here, but present, always moving. The evening meal, bread, beer, whatever the rations provided. Tonight, the rations were adequate. Tonight, no strike needed. Tonight, just the bread and the beer, and the village settling, and the stars appearing above the dry valley, above the Valley of the Kings, above the painted walls, where the gods waited, in colours that would outlast everything. Let the valley go quiet, the tools at rest, the paint dried, the gods waiting, in the dark of the sealed tombs, patient, as gods always were. Chapter 11 is waiting, the last light. The Egyptian understanding of death, which was not, as most cultures understood death, an ending. It was a continuation, a journey, and the preparation for it, the most elaborate, the most expensive, the most carefully considered preparation for anything in the ancient world, but only when you need it. The valley is quiet, the stars are out, the workers are home. The ancient Egyptians were not afraid of death. This is the first thing to understand, and the most important. Not afraid of death, but deeply, profoundly, existentially afraid of something else entirely. Being forgotten. These are not the same fear. Being forgotten, in the Egyptian belief, was the true death, the second death, the one that couldn't be undone. As long as your name was spoken, as long as your image existed, as long as someone, anywhere, remembered you, you continued, in some form, in some way. You were not entirely gone, which is why, when enemies wanted to destroy someone, in ancient Egypt, they didn't just kill them. They erased their name from the walls, from the records, from every surface it had ever been carved. Because without the name, the person ceased to exist, not just in memory, in reality. This single understanding changes everything about ancient Egypt. The pyramids, not just tombs, monuments to a name, ensuring, as long as stone lasted, that the pharaoh would be remembered. The tomb paintings, not just decoration, reality made permanent. The image of the deceased, eating, hunting, worshipping, ensuring that these things continued forever in the afterlife. The offerings made at tombs for years, decades, sometimes centuries after death. Not sentiment, sustenance. The dead needed feeding. The dead needed remembering. The dead needed their names spoken aloud, regularly, or they faded, diminished, were lost. To speak the name of the dead was to keep them alive, the soul. Because the Egyptians did not believe in a single soul. They believed in several, each one a different aspect of the person, each one with different needs, different vulnerabilities, different requirements for survival after death. The car, the life force, the vital energy that animated the body during life. After death, the car remained attached to the body, which is why the body had to be preserved. The car needed a home, a physical anchor. Without the body, or at least an image of the body, the car was homeless, wandering, lost. The bar, something closer to what we might call the personality, the individual character, the unique essence of the person. The bar could move, could travel between the world of the living and the world of the dead, depicted as a human-headed bird, flying out of the tomb during the day, returning at night. The dead, not entirely gone, still moving, still present in some form in the world they had left. The ark, the transformed soul, the goal, what the dead hoped to become if everything went correctly, if the heart was light, if the name was remembered, if the journey through the underworld was successfully navigated. The ark, a luminous being, joining the stars, becoming one of the indestructibles, the circumpolar stars that never set, permanent, brilliant, beyond the reach of death. The ark, the Egyptian version of immortality, not a vague continuation, not a grey afterlife, a transformation into something genuinely better, brighter, more real in some ways than the life that preceded it. The Book of the Dead, which was not, despite the name, a book about death. It was a guide, a manual, a set of spells and instructions for navigating the afterlife, for passing through the duat, the underworld, successfully. 192 spells, some of them practical, instructions for passing through specific gates, instructions for addressing specific gods, instructions for what to say and what not to say at each stage of the journey. Some of them protective, spells to ward off snakes, spells to avoid being turned upside down and having to eat your own feces, which, apparently, was a genuine concern in the afterlife. The Egyptian underworld having specific, practical, documented hazards, and some of them deeply moving. The negative confession, the declaration of innocence, spoken before the gods, before the heart was weighed. I have not stolen. I have not killed. I have not lied. I have not caused anyone to weep. I have not acted with arrogance. I have not taken more than my share. The full list, 42 declarations, each one a statement of how the deceased had tried to live. A moral framework, expressed not as commandments, but as personal testimony. Not "thou shalt not," but "I have not." The difference, profound. The weighing of the heart. This is the moment. The moment every Egyptian thought about their entire life. After death, the deceased was brought before Osiris, the Lord of the Dead, before a panel of 42 gods. The heart, removed from the body, placed on one side of a scale. The feather of Ma'at, the feather of truth, placed on the other, and the scale tipped. If the heart was heavy, weighted down by lies, by cruelty, by the failure to maintain Ma'at, the scale tipped. And Amit, the devourer, part lion, part hippopotamus, part crocodile, waiting beside the scale, ate the heart. And the person ceased to exist, entirely. The second death, the one that couldn't be undone. But if the heart was light, equal to the feather, the scale balanced, and the deceased passed through, into the field of reeds, into the afterlife, into the transformation, into the ark, into the indestructible stars. The mummification, because the body had to last. The car needed its home. The bar needed its anchor. The transformation required something to transform from. 70 days. That was the process. From death to burial, 70 days. The same number of days that Sirius disappeared from the sky every year before its rebirth. Not coincidence. The deceased, following the same journey as the star, disappearing, being transformed, reappearing, reborn. The process itself, extraordinary. The organs removed, preserved separately, in canopic jars. The stomach, the intestines, the lungs, the liver. Each one under the protection of a specific god. Each one carefully sealed, carefully stored, available to the deceased in the afterlife. The heart left in the body, because the heart needed to be weighed. The brain removed through the nose, discarded, because the Egyptians believed the brain was merely a stuffing organ with no particular importance. The thinking, the feeling, the being, all happening in the heart. Wrong, as we now know, but consistent with everything the Egyptians believed about where a person truly lived. What it meant for ordinary people. Because the elaborate tombs, the Book of the Dead, the canopic jars, the 70 days of mummification, these were for the wealthy, for the pharaoh, for the officials and the priests and the people who could afford the full treatment. What about Amenhotep? What about the farmer with his muddy hands and his worn-down teeth and his small house on the edge of the floodplain? He believed the same things. He feared the second death as much as anyone. He wanted, as desperately, to be remembered, to have his name spoken, to have his heart weighed fairly and found light. His burial simpler, the wrapping less elaborate, the tomb a pit in the desert sand rather than a painted chamber. But the amulets placed with him, carefully, the small faience figures, the ushaptis, placed in the grave, to work for him in the afterlife, so he wouldn't have to. Because even in death, Amenhotep had had enough of heavy labour. The legacy. Because here is what strikes me most about the Egyptian understanding of death. It was, at its core, about love. Not fear, not obedience, not the threat of punishment. Love. The love of Isis for Osiris, searching for him, reassembling him, bringing him back. The love of the living for the dead, speaking their names, making their offerings, keeping them present. The love implicit in the negative confession, I have not caused anyone to weep. I have not taken more than my share. A life lived in consideration of others. The whole elaborate architecture of death, built on the foundation that the people you lost were not entirely lost, as long as you remembered them, as long as you said their name, as long as you kept them, somehow, present. The most human belief in the ancient world. Still the most human belief in any world. Let the tomb settle into darkness. The colours on the walls still vivid. The name still carved. The gods still watching. The journey ongoing. Chapter 12 is the last one. The long sleep. How ancient Egyptians said goodnight. The wooden headrest. The rooftop. The stars above. And the belief that every night the sun died, and every morning it was reborn. Sleep, not rest. A small rehearsal for resurrection, but only when you need it. The tomb is quiet. The name is on the wall. The journey is in good hands. Every night, the ancient Egyptians believed, the sun died. Not set, not rested. Died. Ra, descending below the horizon, entering the Duat, the underworld, beginning the 12-hour journey through the regions of the dead, fighting Apophis, moving through darkness, uncertain in some fundamental sense whether he would make it through, whether the morning would come. And sleep, for the ancient Egyptian, was not rest, it was participation. Every person who lay down at night, closed their eyes, surrendered consciousness, was performing, in miniature, the same journey as the sun, going into the dark, hoping to come back, trusting in something that the morning would arrive. Sleep, a small rehearsal for resurrection. Every single night. We have come a long way tonight. Through the Nile at dawn, and the farmer in the mud. Through the scribe's reed, and the gods who ran everything. Through the pyramid builders, and the desert at the edge. Through the market, and the physician, and the night sky. and the tomb makers on strike. Through the last light and the weighing of the heart. And now, here, the last room, the last hour, the rooftop, the stars, the wooden headrest, the sound of the Nile somewhere below, moving, always moving. Let's talk about how ancient Egyptians ended their days. Because there were rituals, small ones, quiet ones, the kind that don't make it into history books, because they were too ordinary, too human, too simply done. The evening prayer first, to Ra descending into the west. Not a formal prayer, not the elaborate ritual of the temple priests, just an acknowledgement. The sun going down and a person noticing, saying something to the light that was leaving. Safe journey. Come back. Please, come back. Then, the household shrine. The small niche in the wall. The figure of Bes, the household protector. The god of sleep and dreams and the safety of children in the night. An offering. Bread. Beer. A small flame. The gods, present in the niche, watching, as they always watched, as they would always watch. The night coming, and the gods, as always, managing it. The amulets, because the Egyptian night was not considered entirely safe. Demons moved at night. Not metaphorical demons, real ones. The Egyptians had catalogued them, named them, documented their habits, their preferences, their particular methods of harm, and had developed, over centuries, specific protections against each one. The amulet placed beneath the headrest. A small carved figure, Fails, that particular blue-green, of the Nile, of rebirth, of everything that continued, placed carefully, under the wooden support where the head would rest. The god, between the sleeper and the night. The heart scarab, worn against the skin. A carved scarab beetle, the symbol of renewal, of the sun rolling across the sky, the dung beetle rolling its ball, both moving the same essential thing, from darkness into light. Worn to bed, because even in sleep, the heart needed protecting. The heart that would one day be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, needed to be, right now, tonight, kept safe. The wooden headrest. Let's spend a moment here, because the wooden headrest is one of the most distinctive objects in ancient Egyptian culture, and one of the most misunderstood. It looks uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable. By modern standards, it was a curved piece of wood on a narrow base that held the head elevated above the mat, allowing air to circulate beneath. In the heat of an Egyptian night, this was practical. The neck supported, the head lifted, the air moving beneath it, cooling. The mat, not a thick mattress, but a woven reed mat, close to the ground, close to the earth, the way the Egyptians slept, always close to the earth. But the headrest was more than practical. It was symbolic, decorated sometimes, with protective figures. Bears again, crouching at each end, guarding the head, the most vulnerable part, the part where the bar entered and exited, the part that needed, perhaps most of all, protecting. The rooftop, because this is where most Egyptians, in the warmer months, actually slept. The houses, mud brick, thick-walled, absorbed the day's heat, released it through the night, making the inside hotter than the outside after dark. So you went up, A simple staircase on the outside of the house. The flat roof swept clean, the mat laid out, the wooden headrest placed. And above you, the sky. Not the ceiling of a bedroom, the actual sky. The body of Nut arched overhead, her skin, the stars, the Milky Way, the river of stars, from horizon to horizon, and the Nile below, reflecting it. The sky above, the sky below, and you between them. On a mat, on a rooftop, in ancient Egypt, 3,000 years ago. Let's visit them one last time, the people we have spent this night with. Amenhotep, the farmer, on his rooftop, his body carrying the day's mud, even now, even washed, even rested. His teeth aching as they always ached. His hands open on the mat, the farming hands, resting. He looked up at Sirius, still there, still announcing, in its quiet, precise way, what was coming. The flood, the new year, another cycle, the same cycle, his father's cycle, his son's cycle, the Nile's cycle, which had been running since before there were people to notice it, and would run long after the last person had looked up at Sirius from a rooftop beside the black land. The scribe, his palette closed, his reed at rest, the 700 symbols somewhere in his mind, always, even now, even in the moments before sleep. A thought forming, something he needed to record tomorrow, a detail he had almost forgotten. He reached for his palette, then stopped. Tomorrow. It would still be there tomorrow. The thought, like the stars, not going anywhere. He put the palette down, lay back, the wooden headrest beneath his neck, Bess at each end, watching. The pyramid builder, who called himself, proudly, one of the drunkards of Menkora, his back carrying the years of blocks, his hands shaped by the sledge ropes, by the stone, by the work. Asleep before his head touched the headrest, the exhaustion, absolute, the way it always was, the way it always would be, for people who had spent their days moving the impossible, dreaming, perhaps, of the thing he had built, still rising, still becoming. The block he placed today, somewhere in the middle of the structure, that would stand for 4,500 years after he was gone. The physician, who had seen, today, a brain operated on, successfully. The patient, breathing when he left. He lay on his mat, the wooden headrest, the amulet beneath it, the night around him, and felt the particular satisfaction of a day when the thing he had tried to do had worked. The oldest feeling, the most reliable feeling, the feeling that made, despite everything, all the cases that hadn't gone well, all the ailments not to be treated, the work worth doing. Again tomorrow, again and again, for as long as the body lasted. And now, the last thing, before Egypt goes dark for the night, before this final chapter closes. The Egyptians had a greeting, used when someone returned from a journey, or woke from sleep. The same greeting for both, because in the Egyptian understanding, they were the same thing. Waking from sleep was a return, a resurrection. Small, daily, but real. The greeting was Ankh Wedja Seneb. Life, prosperity, health. The three things wished for the returning one, for the one who had made the journey through the dark and come back. Life, prosperity, health. And every morning, when the sun rose, when Ra emerged victorious from the underworld, the priests on the temple roof would have exhaled, and perhaps thought something very like that. Another morning, another return, another chance. And you, wherever this found you, whatever brought you here tonight, the Nile is still moving, the stars are still there, the pyramid is still standing, the scribe's words are still on the wall, the farmer's field is still flooded, still waiting, still preparing for another cycle. The physician's honey is still working, the tomb maker's colours still vivid in a sealed chamber, somewhere in the valley. 3,000 years of the same river, the same stars, the same bread, the same fear of being forgotten, the same hope that the morning would come. And it always did. Every morning, it always did. So, lay your head down, not on a wooden headrest, you've earned your pillow, but low, close to the earth, the way the Egyptians always slept, the way people have always slept, when the day was done, when the work was finished, when the sun had gone, and there was nothing left to do except trust. Trust that the morning would come. Trust that Ra, or whatever you call the thing that makes mornings happen, was doing its work, fighting through the dark, moving toward dawn, moving toward the moment when the light would come back, and the priests would exhale, and the farmer would wake, and the scribe would reach for his reed, and Egypt would continue for another day, as it always had, as it always would. Ankh Wedja Seneb. Life, prosperity, health, for the returning one, for you, tonight. The sun is making its journey through the dark. It will be back. It always comes back. If you made it this far, thank you. If this helps you sleep, subscribe. There are more nights coming, more worlds to drift through, more history moving slowly enough to carry you somewhere quiet. Leave a comment telling me where you watched from and what time it was. I read every single one, and if someone you know needs a night like this, send it to them. Good night. Good night. Good night. So in the second mart is the leader to renite like. Good night. If this helped you sleep, needs a night like this. Good night. Good night. Good night. There are more nights coming. If this helped you sleep, needs a night like to carry you somewhere.